The Acolyte, Episode 7, Choice. Alright, it's time for the penultimate episode, and finally we get the continuation of Episode 3's flashback. Will it depict the Jedi as the antagonists? Perhaps Sol commits a dark deed that he's ashamed of, or Torben does something so horrific it drives him to later suicide. Or maybe May is innocent all along and didn't set fire to the fortress. Let's dive in. We start on Brendok 16 years earlier, but from the Jedi's perspective this time. I was expecting May's, Mother Anastaea's, or Coral's point of view, but focusing on the Jedi is an interesting twist. So this shift is promising and already exceeding my expectations. Now, the first thing that I found interesting is that it turns out Indara wasn't lying back in Episode 3. The Jedi genuinely had no clue that there was life on Brendok. Now, as to why they couldn't just scan the planet beforehand and find, a large concentration of life in the Witch Fortress, I have absolutely no idea, but fine. I'm willing to entertain this to see where the writers are going with this. We then learn that the Jedi were actually stuck on this planet for 7 whole weeks investigating a potential emergence in the Force which could create life, and thus far have found nothing, zilch nada. And what's also odd is that Torben was only told about the Jedi's mission on Brendok just now. So, yeah. Understandably, the guy is frustrated and just wants to go back home to Coruscant already. I mean, I would too in his place as well. One day, however, Sol randomly spots May and Osha playing in the woods and decides to follow them back to the Witch Coven stronghold, which as it turns out was actually once a mining facility before the witches came and claimed it as their own. And when inside, Sol really only sees the creepy and bad things going on in there, such as the twins being physically attacked with a force push by Mother Anastaea, and as well some witches chanting or praying around some strange hole which he assumes sacrifices could take place in. So yeah, not a good first impression whatsoever. Eventually, Sol returns back to Indara's group to report on his findings, telling her what he's seen and that he believes the witches to be a cult. Knowing full well that the witches are preparing a ceremony that night, Sol wants the Jedi to take action, with Indara agreeing that, yeah, they'll go and take a look for themselves, see if everything's okay. Alright, so far, so good, I suppose. Although, granted, Sol seems to be a bit too emotional right now for a Jedi. But yeah, at the same time, from the Jedi's perspective, they're being reasonable with the information that they currently have. So that night, the Jedi do arrive at the Witch Stronghold. We're then given the exact same scene already that we saw in Episode 3, where we, this time, actually learn that once the Jedi do enter, Torben's mind is immediately messed with by Mother Anastaea, who tries to manipulate and seduce him, very much in the same manner a Sith kind of would. The whole thing is honestly kind of creepy and really unnerving. It's awkward. Then afterwards, she takes full control of him like we've seen before, and yikes. Yeah, this is not okay. If I'm Indara and I'm seeing these witches for the first time, and this is what they're doing to my Padawan, then this is a huge red flag, and if anything, they're asking for a fight here. Despite this, the Jedi take the high road and decide to leave. Afterwards, we follow a lot of the same that we saw in Episode 3 with Osha and May being tested. But rather this time we specifically see how May was being tested. Indara in addition also tells Sol that Osha is too old to be a Jedi before the Council knows anything about this, and... huh? Okay, so wait, now they're sticking to the original lore that this rule has long existed before the show, right? Yet Leslie Headland, the series writer, before said that the whole reason the Jedi made this rule was due to the events after Osha became a Jedi. So, did she forget this already? Who am I kidding? This is like the 100th time now that Headland and her writers say or do something in this show, and then suddenly forget about it and go contradict it. It's just part of the ride at this point. Anyway, after May's test is complete, things start getting a bit weird, at least for the Jedi, of course. As May, being a kid and probably not really paying attention on what's coming out from her mouth or misremembering things, I don't know, she begins to tell them that Anastaea's plan for the ceremony is that everyone must be sacrificed, which naturally rings alarm bells for Indara and Sol, as well it would for anyone in that situation by hearing this. This prompts Indara to contact the Jedi Council, who in turn basically tells her not to intervene and I guess just let the twins be sacrificed and die? Okay, what in the world is this? There's no way this is for real, and I can only presume the bad writing on this show is painting the Jedi Council as some idiots right now. As heck, I'd go against the Jedi Council too, since they're just made to look like a group that's happy and content with kids being sacrificed for dark magic by some witches. That's not okay and makes zero sense, as after all, the Jedi in the High Republic era, at least from what we know of in the books, are basically the space police at this point. So letting this slide by is messed up. Furthermore, the Jedi Council also tell Indara's group that they are to continue to remain on the planet for who knows how long. And this news naturally frustrates both Torben and Sol. Well, especially Sol, who once again begins to become very emotional for Osha. Which is like, dang, okay, I know he means well and all, but the guy's obsession for Osha is kinda creepy in itself. I really do wish they had done a bit more to explain why Sol has this sudden attachment to Osha of all people. Torben afterwards brings out the blood test results for the twins, which not only shows that they have an extremely high midichlorian count, but that their symbiotes are the exact same, indicating that they were artificially created with the Force from a single consciousness split into two bodies. And Torben, eager to return back to Coruscant, sees this as proof of the Virgins and rushes to retrieve the girls from the Dark Witches. Sol at this time tells Torben to stop and begins chasing after him on a speeder. Yet, when they both arrive at the stronghold, Sol seems to have changed his mind and now wants to help Torben, because for him, this is pretty much the right move. Osha is saved from being sacrificed and they find the Virgins, meaning that they can finally complete their mission. Okay, fair enough. At this point, Sol completely takes over and leads the way inside the stronghold, while Torben follows his lead as backup. It's also at this moment where Sol begins to sense that Osha is in trouble, as she's locked in a room while a fire is spreading, only further justifying, at least for him, his actions to enter the witch stronghold at this point. Meanwhile, inside the said stronghold, Mother Anastasia tells the witches that she's decided to let Osha leave the Jedi. And this angers the rest of the witches, especially Mother Coral, resulting her in stoking May's anger over Osha's decision, pushing the darkness inside her to the limit, and, I gotta ask, why would you do this? What exactly is going through Coral's mind right now to think that doing this is a good idea? I mean, any way you look at it, she's an awful parent right now, and if anything, her actions lead to May going psycho, telling Osha that she wants to kill her and then starts the fire. And yeah, lo and behold, it turns out that May actually did start the fire. It was all her. because she begins burning a book and then is somehow surprised that it catches on fire and doing exactly what she wanted it to do. Yeah, this makes no sense at all, just like it didn't in episode 3. We didn't really learn anything new here. Whatever, so much for all those theories and trying to defend her as being innocent here. But what still doesn't get answered is how is the fire exactly spreading? Like, sure, some of the wiring catches on fire, but like, who knew that stone and rocks were flammable too? Apparently now in Star Wars they are, according to this show. Who knew? Sol and Torben afterwards confront Anastasia, Coral, and the witches before Kelnaka and Indara arrive, and Anastasia begins to say that the Jedi shouldn't have returned, which, again, I keep repeating this same word, it makes no sense as I thought she wanted to give Osha to them. So naturally, they'd have to come back to hear her answer on whether to take Osha or not. Tensions then begin to rise, only for May to run out and begin screaming about the fire. And well, rather than being a responsible adult and, doing something about the fire, Coral decides that no, this is the perfect opportunity to go into an attacking battle stance. I kid you not, thus making Torben ignite his saber to get in a defensive stance himself. And things just get worse from there, as then out of nowhere, Anastasia screams and begins to turn herself into some demonic black smoke monster, and at the same time as well rematerializing May's body into the smoke herself. Sol, who's seeing this and thinks May is Osha, responds like most people would and stabs Anastasia before her monstrous transformation is complete, to only for her afterwards to tell him that she just wanted to give him Osha this entire time? Is she being serious here? Like, come on, we're looking at this through the Jedi's perspective. There's no way they would know this at all. She literally turned herself into a demonic black smoke monster with black eyes and sharp vampire teeth out of nowhere. And how was Sol supposed to react to this? Like, I couldn't at all sympathize with Sol's guilt because, from my perspective, he did nothing wrong here. As instead, Anastasia's move was inherently threatening and easily understood as an attack. Sol was only acting in self-defense, and when he does kill her, she says, "Oh, but I was actually going to give you Osha." Whoa, come on, how convenient of her to say that. Yet when Sol and Torben did show up at the stronghold, all Anastasia was telling them that it was foolish of them to return here and then talked about the destruction of the Jedi. Yeah, clearly based on that, ain't no one thinking you're going to give them Osha. Instead, you're only acting hostile and then out of nowhere, with no warning, all of a sudden turn into some mist demon. Again, without warning, only means that my life at that point is in danger, as well the little girls, and I have the right to defend myself. So naturally, after Sol takes out the threat and Anastasia says that she was going to do the opposite of everything she just said and acted, I had the exact same confused WTF expression as Sol did in this scene. Like, come on, is she gaslighting him in her death like that? Who in the world thought that this was going to be brilliant dialogue and writing here? It's just nonsensical. With Anastasia dead, Coral attacks Sol, who dodges her moves, while Torben is barraged by arrows from the witch archers, and I gotta hand it to him. He does a brilliant job in defending himself and handling that lightsaber. It doesn't take long for the witches to soon quickly realize that they can't beat the Jedi in a fight like this. So Coral and the witch archers all turn into smoke and disappear. We then see that Kilnaka has arrived in the stronghold, but he isn't the same friend that Sol and Torben know of him to be. Rather, it turns out that the witches have possessed Kilnaka and use him to attack Torben and Sol. And while it's not the best or longest fight I've ever seen in a Disney Star Wars show, it was at least entertaining to see the Wookiee Jedi finally, do something on this show. Yeah, he was a bit clumsy and should have been more physically stronger than portrayed here, but I'm willing to write that off as the witches not fully knowing how to use his power, as after all, they were the ones controlling him. Luckily, Andara shows up at the nick of time and frees Kilnaka's mind, resulting in all of the witches just simultaneously all dying? Okay, remind me again, what was the point of that whole power of many scene in episode 3 when one Jedi was able to defeat all of these witches just like that? I suppose the power of one triumphs over the power of many, eh? Sol then runs inside to look for the twins, and man, just watching all this again is only reminding me of how terrible the set here looks like with all this fake fire. It just does not look good whatsoever. Again, none of this should be on fire. It's all stone for crying out loud. There's all these little random patches of fire, which I don't know how is it still on fire. But yeah, moving on, when Sol does finally spot the twins, he fails to save them both from the broken bridge, instead only choosing to save Osha while May falls into the lava to her presumed death at the time. And well, I've got two questions here. Numero uno, why didn't Sol just, levitate the twins themselves instead of the broken bridge? Not only are they lighter, but it'd be the smarter plan to do here, especially for a Jedi Master like himself, so, really, why not? Or, okay, fine, when he was trying to hold the bridge, couldn't the twins just, walk back and get off instead of just standing there like some mindless zombies? This scene felt so forced in order to have Sol have to make a hard decision because, this was apparently the best the writers of this show could figure out. And clearly it's not a good one. Besides, we of course also know that May doesn't die here and somehow teleports to the forest. And why doesn't this episode explain that? I mean, wasn't this supposed to be the episode that explains and answers all of our questions about the episode 3 flashback? So much for that, I guess. Unless, of course, Coral and her archer witches are still alive, that is, and they're the ones who brought her here. As well, we never technically saw them die, so that's really my only guess for answering this one. Now, at the end of this episode, the Jedi begin to return back to Coruscant with Osha, and it's at this point that Andara decides to put the blame of the incident on May's fire as part of a cover-up in order to explain why they went against the Jedi Council's stupid orders, and so that Sol can train Osha as his Padawan. And well, that's it. That was the whole mystery this show has been stringing us along this entire time. Only to show us that, hey, the Jedi, while not perfect, only really making reasonable moves here, only made reasonable moves. But what really bothers me now is why on earth did Torben commit suicide in episode 2 for? He did nothing wrong here to warrant such an action. He, like the rest of the Jedi, didn't think the kids were safe with some demonic witches, especially having been possessed by them himself, so he of course would know this best. And even then, him going back to the stronghold didn't really change all that much. Because yeah, granted, he had mainly his own selfish intent in that moment to want to complete the mission for his team, but regardless, May was still going to set the place on fire whether Torben showed up back there or not. And even then, it was Sol who takes the lead at that point anyway. Torben just follows along as backup. Because at the end of the day, the Jedi Council told them that they have to find the Virgins, and hey, the Virgins is in that stronghold. So hence why it's part of the Jedi's mission to get inside there. And really, that's just it. Episode 2 had us believing that Torben committed some horrific atrocity, when really he was just homesick and didn't believe that the girls were safe with some demonic witches. He was young and scared and had his mind messed with, only to be attacked and almost killed off by his trusted friend. Suffice to say, he had a rough day. And besides, if anything, Torben acted only on the fence here. As in the episode, it clearly shows Coral moving to attack position first, not Torben. Then the rest of the witches follow and start shooting arrows at Torben, and all he does, and what else he can do, is continue defending himself like any sane human would in that situation. The whole time he does absolutely nothing but keep defending himself, not killing a single witch or anything in the process. So, again, remind me, how exactly is he supposed to feel so guilty as to want to commit suicide later on? It's just bonkers, and it makes absolutely no logical sense to me whatsoever. Overall, I'm surprised to say it, but I actually ended up rather liking this episode, despite all of its flaws and ridiculous writing. Now, let me be clear, it's not a good episode by any means in normal TV standards or even Disney Star Wars TV, but we're talking about the Acolyte standards here, which are not that high to begin with. Then, yeah, sure, I overall didn't mind it. And that's because, for the first time in this show, I was able to root for the main characters that we were following. I actually really liked Indara and her group, and now I kinda wish this series was focused on her and this group, rather than what we got with May and Osha flip-flopping all the time. So for me, it's disappointing the route that the show has instead decided to take. Besides, it's kind of funny that Leslie Headland's intention with this episode was to make the Jedi look bad and for us to hate them, while trying to make the witches the innocent good guys, when in reality, pretty much just the opposite happens. I mean, to be fair, she did make the Jedi Council look like dimwits, but that's another story. To be honest, this is a flashback episode that didn't really even further the main plot at all whatsoever, as we don't learn anything substantial here other than that the Jedi weren't the so-called boogeymen that we were previously made to believe. And now that we know of the whole mystery behind what happened on Brendok, what else is there really left on this show now? Other than, I guess, to wrap up Kimir's story, probably? Oh, and let us never speak of that music in the end credits ever again. Seriously, Leslie, a pop song in Star Wars? It's just, no comment. I think I said enough about this episode already. If you like it, then you like it. If not, then no. But let me know what you thought about the episode itself in the comments down below. And as always, I'll see you on the next one.